My nephews stole $85,000 from my bank account, then blocked my phone number and moved to another state thinking they'd gotten away with it. But here I am, sitting in my North Carolina home office with their house deed in my hands, because apparently they forgot that their Uncle Robert didn't spend 40 years as an engineer without learning how to solve complex problems. The irony isn't lost on me that Jake and Lisa Anderson, who thought they were so clever with their little technology scam, are now homeless, while the old man they tried to rob is holding the keys to what used to be their dream home. 3 months ago, I trusted my sister's boy Jake when he offered to help me set up online banking, saying it would make managing my retirement funds so much easier. "Uncle Robert, you're getting older, and all this technology stuff can be confusing," he said with that charming smile that reminded me of his mother when she was young. What I didn't know was that while he was helping me navigate those banking websites, he was secretly recording every password, every security question, every piece of information he'd need to drain my accounts later. The worst part is that I was grateful for his help, even offered to pay him for his time, never suspecting that my own flesh and blood was planning the biggest theft of my life. If you've ever been taken advantage of by someone you trusted, if you know what it feels like to discover that family members saw you as nothing more than a target, then settle in close, because this old engineer's got a story that'll make your blood boil and your heart sing all at the same time. What Jake and Lisa didn't count on was that I might be 68 years old, but I've still got all my wits about me, and more importantly, I've got something they clearly don't: patience, determination, and a deep understanding of how systems work. The morning I discovered my accounts had been emptied, I sat right here in this chair, staring at my computer screen, showing a balance of $312, where there should have been $85,000. 40 years of careful saving, my entire retirement nest egg, gone overnight while I slept peacefully thinking my money was safe. My first instinct was to call Jake, to ask if maybe there had been some mistake, some technical glitch that could explain how decades of my life's work had simply vanished. But when I dialed his number, I got a message saying the line had been disconnected. That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated attack on an old man they thought would be too embarrassed, too confused, or too defeated to fight back. They were wrong on all 3 counts. If you believe in justice, if you think people who prey on the elderly should face consequences, go ahead and subscribe to Gramps' Revenge Stories, because I've got more tales of turning the tables than you might expect. And if you want to know how a retired engineer used his problem-solving skills to not just get his money back, but to take everything his scammers owned, well, you're about to find out that age and experience can be more powerful than youth and technology. Jake wasn't always a thief, and that's what makes this betrayal cut so deep. I remember when that boy was just 8 years old, coming to visit me and Martha during summer vacations, wide-eyed and curious about everything in my workshop. He'd spend hours asking questions about the blueprints spread across my drafting table, wanting to understand how bridges stayed up and why buildings didn't fall down. "Uncle Robert," he'd say in that serious little boy voice, "when I grow up, I want to be smart like you." Martha would bring us lemonade and cookies, laughing at how Jake hung on my every word like I was explaining the secrets of the universe. I taught him how to use a slide rule before calculators became common, showed him the beauty of mathematical precision, the satisfaction of solving problems through careful analysis and logical thinking. When Jake struggled with algebra in high school, I spent entire weekends tutoring him at this very desk, breaking down complex equations until that moment of understanding would light up his face. "I get it now," he'd shout, and I'd feel that deep pride that comes from watching a young mind grasp something new. His mother, my sister Carol, would call to thank me, saying Jake talked about those tutoring sessions for weeks afterward. Even after Jake went to college for computer science, we stayed close. He'd call me on Sunday evenings to talk about his classes, asking for advice about everything from difficult professors to girlfriend troubles. When he graduated, I was there in the audience, cheering louder than anyone when they called his name. Martha had made his favorite chocolate cake for the celebration dinner afterward, and Jake gave a speech about how his Uncle Robert had inspired him to pursue engineering thinking, even in the digital age. "You taught me that every problem has a solution," he said that night, raising his glass in a toast. "You just have to be patient enough to find it." When Jake married Lisa 5 years ago, I walked him down the aisle because his father had passed away young. Standing there in my best suit, Watching my nephew pledge his love and commitment, I felt like I was looking at the future of our family. Martha had died 2 years earlier, and having Jake and Lisa in my life helped fill some of that emptiness. They'd visit for holidays, call to check on me, send photos from their vacations. Lisa seemed like a sweet girl, always asking about my health, my finances, whether I needed help with anything around the house. Looking back now, I realize those questions about my finances weren't concern, they were reconnaissance. Lisa was mapping out my financial situation, while Jake was gaining my trust, both of them playing a long game that would culminate in the systematic theft of everything I'd worked for. The young man I'd taught to solve problems had learned that lesson too well, except he'd decided to solve his money problems by stealing from the uncle who'd loved him like a son. That 8-year-old boy, who wanted to be smart like his Uncle Robert, had grown into a man who was smart enough to rob me blind, but apparently not smart enough to cover his tracks. The warning signs started about 6 months before the theft, though I didn't recognize them as warnings at the time. Jake's visits became more frequent, but instead of our usual conversations about life and family, he kept steering every discussion toward my financial situation. "Uncle Robert, are you sure you're getting the best interest rates on your savings?" he'd ask, or "Have you thought about moving your money to online banks that offer better returns?" At first, I appreciated what seemed like genuine concern for my financial well-being, especially since managing money had become more complicated since Martha died. Then came the subtle pressure about technology. "Uncle Robert, you really need to get with the times," Lisa would say during their visits. "Online banking is so much safer than those paper statements, and you can check your accounts anytime." They'd show me articles on their phones about elderly people being victimized by mail theft and check fraud, painting a picture of an increasingly dangerous world where only technology could keep me safe. When I mentioned that I was perfectly comfortable with my current banking methods, Jake would shake his head like I was being foolishly stubborn. The breakthrough moment for them came when I had that minor fender bender in the grocery store parking lot last fall. Nothing serious, just a scratch on my bumper from backing into a pole, but Jake seized on it like it was evidence of my declining capabilities. "Uncle Robert, this is exactly what I'm worried about," he said when I called to tell him about it. "If you're having trouble with spatial awareness, how can you be sure you're managing your finances properly?" The logic was flawed, but the concern seemed genuine, and I started wondering if maybe they were right. Looking back, I can see how carefully they orchestrated my compliance. Every conversation was designed to undermine my confidence while positioning themselves as the solution to problems they were creating in my mind. They'd mention news stories about elderly people losing their savings to scams, always emphasizing how technology could have prevented those losses. Lisa even brought me a tablet computer as an early Christmas present, saying it would help me stay connected and safe in the digital age. The final push came when they offered to help me set up online banking just as a backup to my traditional methods. "We're not asking you to change everything, Uncle Robert," Jake explained patiently. "We just want to make sure you have options. What if the bank is closed and you need to check something important?" The way he presented it made resistance seem unreasonable, even paranoid. Why wouldn't I want additional ways to access my own money? So on a sunny Tuesday morning in February, I invited Jake and Lisa into my home office and let them walk me through setting up online access to all my accounts. I thought I was learning. They knew they were stealing. March 15th will forever be burned into my memory as the day I learned that trust can be weaponized by the people you love most. I woke up that Tuesday morning planning to transfer some money from savings to checking to cover my quarterly property tax payment, a routine transaction I'd done hundreds of times over the years. But when I logged into my online banking account using the password Jake had helped me create, I found myself staring at numbers that didn't make sense. My savings account, which should have shown $85,347.83, displayed a balance of $0.00. At first, I thought it was a computer error, maybe a glitch in the bank's system that would be corrected soon. I refreshed the page several times, even turned my computer off and back on, but the numbers remained the same. My checking account showed $312.67, barely enough to cover utilities, let alone the property tax bill that was due in 2 weeks. 40 years of disciplined saving, every overtime shift I'd worked, every vacation Martha and I had skipped to add to our retirement fund, all of it had vanished overnight like it had never existed. My hands were shaking as I called the bank's customer service line, certain that someone would be able to explain this obvious mistake. "Mr. Whitmore," the representative said after checking my account, "I show several large electronic transfers that were initiated yesterday evening. The funds were transferred to an account at First National Bank of Tennessee in the name of Anderson Financial Services." Anderson Financial Services. Jake's last name. The coincidence was too obvious to ignore, but part of me still hoped there was some legitimate explanation. I called Jake's phone number immediately, my heart pounding as I waited for him to answer and clear up this terrible misunderstanding. But instead of Jake's familiar voice, I heard a recorded message. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." Lisa's phone gave me the same message. In the space of 24 hours, my nephews had stolen my life savings and erased themselves from existence, leaving me with nothing but empty accounts and the crushing realization that I'd been played by experts. The bank's fraud department was sympathetic, but not particularly hopeful. "Mr. Whitmore, since you voluntarily provided your login credentials to the perpetrators, this is technically not unauthorized access," the investigator explained. "The transfers were made using your passwords from a computer that had previously accessed your accounts. Legally, this makes prosecution much more difficult." The irony was devastating. By trying to protect myself through technology, I'd actually removed all the protections that might have saved me. That night I sat in my dark house calculating how long my remaining $312 would last, wondering if I'd have to sell the home Martha and I had shared for 35 years just to survive. Jake and Lisa had taken more than money. They'd stolen my sense of security, my trust in family, my confidence in my own judgment. But as I sat there in the darkness, something else began to grow alongside the hurt and betrayal. A cold, calculating anger that reminded me why I'd been successful as an engineer. I was good at solving problems, and this was just another problem that needed solving. The weeks following the theft were the loneliest of my life, a silence so complete it felt like the world had forgotten I existed. With Jake and Lisa's phone numbers disconnected and no forwarding address, I had no way to reach them, no way to demand answers or beg for the return of money I desperately needed. The isolation was made worse by my own shame. How could I explain to friends and neighbors that I'd been foolish enough to trust my own family with my financial information? How could I admit that the nephew I'd bragged about for years had systematically planned and executed the theft of my entire retirement? I stopped going to the senior center, where I'd played chess on Wednesday afternoons for the past 5 years. When Harold Morrison asked why I'd missed so many games, I mumbled something about not feeling well. But the truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of sitting across from him, knowing I'd been reduced to counting quarters for grocery money. The shame was overwhelming. Here I was, a man who'd spent decades solving complex engineering problems, brought down by a simple con game executed by people I'd loved and trusted. My daily routine became an exercise in survival mathematics. I'd wake up each morning and calculate exactly how much money I could spend that day, while still having enough to last until my Social Security check arrived. Meals became strategic decisions. Was it better to buy peanut butter for protein or pasta for calories? I started walking to the grocery store instead of driving to save gas money, telling myself the exercise was good for me, while knowing the real reason was that every dollar mattered now in ways it never had before. The hardest part was having no one to talk to about what had happened. My sister Carol, Jake's mother, had died 3 years earlier, taking with her the one person who might have been able to help me understand how her son had become capable of such cruelty. My few remaining relatives lived far away and had their own problems to worry about. I considered calling my old colleagues from the engineering firm, but pride held me back. How could I tell them that Robert Whitmore, the guy who'd always had his finances in perfect order, had been cleaned out by his own nephew? Sleep became elusive as my mind churned through the same questions over and over again. How long had Jake and Lisa been planning this? Was every kind gesture, every concerned phone call, every holiday visit just part of an elaborate setup? Had they been laughing at me behind my back, calling me gullible, planning how they'd spend my money while I was still sitting in my chair, thinking they cared about my well-being? But somewhere in those dark, sleepless nights, my engineer's mind began to work the problem differently. Instead of asking why this had happened to me, I started asking how I could make it unhappen. Jake and Lisa had made a critical error in their planning. They'd assumed their victim would be too ashamed, too confused, or too defeated to fight back. They'd forgotten that the man they'd robbed had spent 4 decades turning impossible problems into elegant solutions. 2 months after the theft, sitting in my nearly empty house with a stack of unpaid bills and $17 in my checking account, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to feel sorry for myself, I was going to treat this like any other engineering problem that needed solving. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started documenting everything I could remember about Jake and Lisa's visits, their questions, their behavior, their timeline. If I was going to get my money back, I needed to approach this systematically, the way I'd approach any complex project. The breakthrough came when I remembered something Jake had mentioned during one of his helpful visits about finances. He'd bragged about buying a house in Tennessee with a really great mortgage rate, thanks to his excellent credit score. If Jake and Lisa had used my stolen money as a down payment on their house, then that house was legally purchased with stolen funds. More importantly, if they'd gotten a mortgage, there would be public records, paper trails, legal vulnerabilities that even the smartest scammer couldn't erase. I spent the next week at the public library using their computers to research property records in Tennessee. It took patience and methodical searching, but eventually I found them. Jake and Lisa Anderson had purchased a $340,000 house in Nashville just 2 weeks after my money disappeared. The down payment was $85,000, exactly the amount they'd stolen from me. The coincidence was too perfect to be anything but evidence of their crime. Armed with this information, I contacted Daniel Harris, an attorney who specialized in financial crimes and elder abuse. When I explained my situation and showed him the documentation I'd compiled, his eyes lit up with the kind of interest that told me I wasn't crazy, wasn't hopeless, wasn't just a foolish old man who'd been taken for a ride. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, leaning forward in his chair, "what you've uncovered here is a clear case of wire fraud, elder abuse, and money laundering. The fact that they used your stolen funds to purchase real estate actually makes this easier to prosecute and recover." The legal strategy Daniel outlined was elegant in its simplicity. Since Jake and Lisa had used stolen money to purchase their house, the court could order the property seized and sold to compensate me for my losses. Better yet, since real estate had appreciated significantly in Nashville over the past few months, the house was now worth considerably more than what they'd paid for it. "You're not just going to get your money back," Daniel explained with a smile. "You're going to get your money back with interest, plus legal fees, plus damages for the emotional distress they've caused you." The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later, and within days, Jake and Lisa were served with papers at their beautiful new home. I imagined their shock when they realized that the old man they'd thought they'd beaten had not only found them, but was coming for everything they owned. For the first time since that terrible morning in March, I felt something other than despair. I felt the satisfaction of watching a carefully engineered plan come together, the same feeling I'd had when a complex structural problem finally yielded to mathematical precision and logical thinking. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my home office holding the deed to Jake and Lisa's former house in Nashville, a piece of paper that represents more than just financial recovery. It represents the triumph of persistence over predation, wisdom over cunning, and justice over theft. The court case was surprisingly straightforward, once Daniel presented the evidence I'd compiled. Judge Patricia Williams took one look at the timeline, the property records, and the financial transactions, and ruled that the house had been purchased with stolen funds and must be surrendered immediately to compensate for the crimes committed against me. Jake and Lisa showed up to the final hearing, looking nothing like the confident young couple who'd sat in my living room explaining how technology would keep me safe. They looked haggard, desperate, caught in a web of their own making with nowhere left to run. When the judge ordered them to vacate their home within 30 days and turn over the deed to me, Lisa actually started crying. I felt no satisfaction in her tears, no joy in their obvious distress, but I felt something more valuable, the restoration of my own sense of justice and capability. The house sold for $400,000, giving me not only my original $85,000 back, but an additional profit that more than compensated for the months of stress, the legal fees, and the emotional damage they'd inflicted. More importantly, the victory restored something I'd thought was lost forever: my confidence in my own judgment, and my ability to solve problems that seemed impossible. Jake and Lisa had assumed that age made me weak, that isolation made me helpless, that shame would keep me silent. They'd underestimated the power of an engineer's mind applied to the problem of their own destruction. What they never understood was that stealing from me wasn't just theft. It was a challenge to everything I'd learned in 40 years of professional problem-solving. Every complex bridge I'd designed, every structural issue I'd resolved, every impossible deadline I'd met had prepared me for this moment. They'd picked the wrong target, made the wrong assumptions, and ultimately learned that experience and determination can be more powerful than youth and technology. The last I heard, Jake and Lisa were living in a rental apartment in Memphis, both working retail jobs to make ends meet while dealing with the federal charges that followed our civil case. I don't take pleasure in their downfall, but I sleep well, knowing that they'll think twice before targeting another elderly person who might seem like an easy mark. Sometimes the best way to prevent future crimes is to make sure current criminals face real consequences for their actions. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated because of your age or targeted because someone thought you were vulnerable, leave me a comment below. Your story matters, and sharing it might help someone else find the strength to fight back. Subscribe to Gramps' Revenge Stories if you believe that justice isn't just for the young, the connected, or the technologically savvy. It's for anyone with enough determination to turn the tables on those who try to prey on them. Age and treachery will always be overcome by youth and skill, but age and skill will beat youth and treachery every single time.